And there's only one place where I may be able to communicate with her now. Castle Grayskull.
Picture this. It's 1985, and you're 8 years old, racing home from school to catch He-Man at 4 p.m. You've got your action figures lined up, ready to recreate Castle Grayskull battles during commercial breaks. But then, nothing. No Season 3. No proper finale. Just gone. What the hell happened to the most powerful man in the universe? Look, if you're watching this video, chances are you lived through the He-Man phenomenon. You remember the rush of that opening theme, the way Prince Adam would hold up that sword and transform into the most jacked cartoon character ever created. You probably owned at least one Castle Grayskull, and let's be honest, you definitely tried yelling, "By the power of Grayskull," at least once, hoping something magical would happen. But here's what nobody told us back then. He-Man wasn't killed by Skeletor or some cosmic villain. The real enemy was something far more sinister. Corporate greed and executive incompetence that would make even the most evil schemes of Snake Mountain look like child's play. Today, I'm going to reveal the shocking truth behind why Masters of the Universe was really canceled after just 2 seasons. And trust me, this story has more twists than a Filmation animation loop. We're talking about a franchise that went from revolutionary marketing genius to complete commercial suicide in just 4 years. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how Mattel managed to kill their own golden goose, and why this cautionary tale is more relevant today than ever. The revolutionary beginning. Let's go back to 1982. Reagan's in the White House. MTV actually plays music videos. And Mattel is looking at the astronomical success of Star Wars toys thinking, we need a piece of that action. But here's the thing. Mattel didn't just want to copy Star Wars. They wanted to create something completely new. Something that would blow kids' minds. And man, did they deliver. The concept was pure genius. What if Luke Skywalker and Conan the Barbarian had a baby? And that baby grew up to be absolutely ripped. That's essentially what He-Man was. A sword and planet hybrid that combined medieval fantasy with sci-fi technology. It was familiar enough that kids could relate to it, but weird enough to feel completely fresh. Think about it. Where else could you have a guy with a bowl cut riding a giant green tiger, fighting a skeleton-faced wizard who lived in a mountain shaped like a skull? It was gloriously insane, and we ate it up. But the real stroke of genius wasn't the characters or the setting. It was what Mattel did next. Something that was considered revolutionary at the time. Cross-platform brand synergy. See, back in the early 80s, toy companies and TV shows were separate entities. You'd make toys, someone else would make cartoons, and maybe, if you were lucky, they'd complement each other. But Mattel said, screw that. We're going to create a daily cartoon that's basically a 22-minute commercial for our toys. And it worked. Holy crap, did it work. The Filmation cartoon hit syndication like a sledgehammer. 130 episodes over 2 seasons, airing every single day after school. For kids like us, it was appointment television. We'd plan our entire afternoon around He-Man, and then immediately start begging our parents for whatever new character had just appeared on screen. This wasn't just marketing. This was psychological warfare against parents' wallets, and it was devastatingly effective. The golden years. By 1984, Masters of the Universe wasn't just a toy line. It was a cultural phenomenon. We're talking about one of the best-selling toy lines of the entire decade. Mattel was printing money faster than they could count it. The numbers were staggering. In 1984, they released 17 new action figures. In 1985, 19 more. Each one carefully introduced in the cartoon first, building anticipation, creating demand. It was a perfectly orchestrated machine of childhood desire and parental spending. And let's be real, those toys were incredible. Sure, they only had about 5 points of articulation, but they were built like tanks. How many of you still have your original He-Man figure? I bet that thing could survive a nuclear apocalypse and still be ready to defend Eternia. But it wasn't just the main line that was killing it. Mattel expanded the universe with She-Ra, Princess of Power, giving them access to the girl toy market too. Suddenly, they had boys and girls covered, parents buying double the merchandise. It was corporate synergy at its finest. The cartoon was everywhere. 130 episodes meant that local TV stations could run He-Man every day for over 6 months without repeating an episode. Kids across America were getting their daily dose of moral lessons wrapped in sword and sorcery action, and loving every minute of it. This was the peak. This was when everything was working exactly as planned. Mattel had cracked the code, figured out how to turn children's entertainment into a money printing machine. But here's the thing about peaks. There's only one direction to go from there. The competition heats up. While Mattel was busy counting their money, something dangerous was happening. The competition was getting better. A lot better. See, when He-Man first hit the scene in 1982, the action figure market was pretty basic. Most toys were simple, static figures with minimal articulation. He-Man's 5.5-inch size and muscle-bound sculpts were impressive enough to dominate the market. But by the mid-80s, Hasbro had entered the game with two absolute game changers, G.I. Joe and Transformers. Now, I know some of you were G.I. Joe kids, and I get it. Those almost 4-inch figures were incredible. They had articulation that made He-Man look like a statue. You could pose them in realistic combat positions, create elaborate dioramas, tell complex stories. They felt like real military action figures, not fantasy barbarians. And don't even get me started on Transformers. Here were toys that were essentially mechanical puzzles, robots that turned into cars, planes, and trucks. The engineering was mind-blowing. Kids weren't just playing with action figures. They were solving problems, figuring out transformations, engaging their brains in ways that He-Man's simple Power Punch action feature just couldn't match. Meanwhile, what was He-Man offering? The same basic figure design they'd been using since 1982. Sure, they'd add a new weapon or a spring-loaded action feature, but fundamentally, these were the same under-articulated muscle men they'd always been. It's like watching your favorite sports team refuse to adapt their playbook while everyone else is innovating. You can see the writing on the wall, but you're powerless to stop it. The market was evolving, demanding more sophisticated play experiences, and Mattel was still stuck in 1982, thinking that bigger muscles and louder colors were enough to stay competitive. They were wrong. Dead wrong. The Fatal Mistake of 1986. Now here's where the story gets really ugly, guys. Because what killed He-Man wasn't the competition. It wasn't changing tastes or cultural shifts. It was the corporate suits making boneheaded decisions for quick cash. Picture this. It's 1986, and some Mattel executives are sitting in a boardroom, looking at their year-end bonuses. These bonuses are tied to shipping numbers. The more toys they ship to stores, the bigger their paychecks. Simple, right? But here's the problem. Retailers had gotten smart about Mattel's ordering games. See, stores would typically order way more inventory than they actually wanted, knowing that Mattel would usually ship less than requested. It was like a weird corporate dance that everyone understood. Except in 1986, these brilliant executives decided to break the rules. Instead of shipping the usual reduced amounts, they decided to ship everything. Every single unit that retailers had ordered, plus leftover European inventory, plus the planned 1987 releases that they rushed to market. We're talking about 47 new action figures hitting stores in a single year. 47! That's more than double what they'd released in 1985. Imagine walking into a Toys R Us and seeing the entire He-Man aisle just completely stuffed with figures. Not just the new ones, but old ones, European variants, early releases, everything. It was like a toy avalanche. And here's the kicker. The executives knew this would flood the market. They knew it would force retailers to slash prices to clear inventory. They knew it would damage the brand's perceived value, but they did it anyway because their bonuses depended on those shipping numbers. It's the kind of short-sighted thinking that makes you want to grab these guys by the shoulders and shake them. You had the hottest toy line in America, and you killed it for a bigger Christmas bonus. The results were predictable and devastating. Stores couldn't move the inventory. Prices got slashed. Parents stopped buying He-Man figures because they knew they could wait a few weeks and get them for half price. The entire premium positioning of the brand collapsed overnight. Retailers lost confidence. Kids moved on to other toys. And Mattel's golden goose was suddenly laying rotten eggs. The media disasters. But wait, it gets worse. Because just when Mattel needed a win to revitalize the brand, they decided to make a movie. And not just any movie. They were going to create the Star Wars of the 80s. The 1987 Masters of the Universe movie should have been He-Man's triumphant return to relevance. Instead, it became one of the most spectacular failures in toy-to-film history. Now, I know some of you have a soft spot for this movie. Dolph Lundgren looked the part, and there were some decent practical effects. But let's be honest, this thing was a disaster from day one. First off, they had a budget of $22 million, which sounds like a lot until you realize they were trying to create an entire fantasy universe. For comparison, that's about what they spent on catering for the later Marvel movies. But the real problem wasn't the budget. It was the complete misunderstanding of what made He-Man special. Instead of giving us Eternia, Castle Grayskull, and the rich fantasy world we loved, they moved most of the action to Earth. Earth! Can you imagine? It's like making a Star Wars movie and setting 90% of it in a suburban mall. You're taking everything that made the property unique and throwing it away to save money. And don't even get me started on replacing Orko with Gwildor. Orko was annoying, sure, but he was our annoying floating magician. Gwildor looked like a rejected Muppet with a bad attitude. The movie bombed spectacularly. $22 million budget, $17 million box office. It was such a disaster that it helped kill Canon Films, the studio that made it. That's not just a flop. That's a career-ending, company-destroying catastrophe. Instead of revitalizing the brand, the movie became the final nail in He-Man's coffin. It confirmed to everyone, retailers, parents, kids, that Masters of the Universe was yesterday's news. The cartoon's abrupt end. Meanwhile, the cartoon that had started it all was facing its own problems. Remember, the Filmation series had been the engine-driving toy sales since 1982. It was the daily advertisement that kept kids interested and parents spending. But by 1985, Filmation had burned through 130 episodes at breakneck speed. They'd created enough content to run daily syndication for months, but they'd also exhausted their creative well. The stories were getting repetitive, the animation was getting cheaper, and frankly, the magic was wearing thin. More importantly, the business model was breaking down. The cartoon existed to sell toys, but if the toys weren't selling, what was the point of the cartoon? Mattel wasn't going to keep funding a daily advertisement for products that were sitting unsold in warehouses. So in 1985, just as the toy line was about to implode, the cartoon quietly ended. No grand finale, no proper conclusion to storylines, no farewell episode. It just stopped. For us kids, it was confusing and heartbreaking. One day He-Man was there, the next day it wasn't. We didn't understand the business realities behind the scenes. We just knew that our daily dose of Eternia had vanished without explanation. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as Mattel was flooding the market with toys in 1986, they'd already killed the primary marketing vehicle that drove demand for those toys. It's like canceling all your advertising right before your biggest product launch. The psychological impact. Here's something the business analysts never talk about, but those of us who lived through it remember: the cultural backlash. By the mid-'80s, He-Man was facing criticism that feels very familiar today. Parent groups were complaining about the hyper-masculine imagery, the violence, the commercialization of children's entertainment. There were concerns about gender stereotypes, about promoting toxic masculinity, though they didn't use that term back then. The same qualities that made He-Man appealing to us kids, the muscles, the power, the aggression, were making adults uncomfortable. And Mattel, instead of defending their creation or evolving it thoughtfully, just gave up. They'd created a brand that was culturally inflexible. He-Man was what he was, a muscle-bound barbarian who solved problems with strength. There was no room for nuance, no space for growth, no way to adapt to changing social attitudes. Compare that to something like G.I. Joe, which could evolve from military action to anti-terrorist operations to environmental protection. Or Transformers, which could reinvent itself with new characters and storylines every few years. He-Man was trapped in amber, a relic of early 80s attitudes that was becoming increasingly out of step with the world around it. The real lessons. So what really killed He-Man? It wasn't Skeletor or Beastman or any cosmic villain. It was a perfect storm of corporate incompetence, market evolution, and cultural inflexibility. The 1986 inventory disaster was the immediate cause of death, but the underlying problems ran much deeper. Mattel had created a brand that couldn't adapt, couldn't evolve, couldn't survive in a changing marketplace. They'd prioritized short-term profits over long-term brand health. They'd ignored competitive threats until it was too late. They'd treated their most valuable intellectual property like a disposable commodity. Most damaging of all, they'd forgotten that behind all the marketing and merchandising were real fans. Kids like us who genuinely love these characters and stories. When they killed He-Man for a quarterly bonus, they weren't just destroying a product line. They were breaking the hearts of millions of kids who'd invested emotionally in the world of Eternia. the legacy. Here's the thing, though. He-Man's death taught the entire industry valuable lessons about brand management, about the dangers of over-commercialization, about the importance of respecting your audience. Modern toy companies learned from Mattel's mistakes. They understood that sustainable success requires long-term thinking, careful inventory management, and genuine respect for the properties they're stewarding. And in a weird way, He-Man's failure made his eventual resurrections more meaningful. When the brand came back in the 2000s, and again recently with Kevin Smith's Masters of the Universe revelation, there was a sense of redemption, of unfinished business finally being addressed. We never got that proper ending in 1985. We never got closure for Prince Adam's story. Never saw He-Man truly defeat Skeletor once and for all. Those loose threads have kept the brand alive in our hearts for nearly 4 decades. So there you have it. The real reason He-Man was canceled after just 2 seasons. It wasn't creative exhaustion or natural audience decline. It was corporate greed, executive incompetence, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what made the brand special. Mattel had lightning in a bottle, and they smashed the bottle for short-term gain. They turned the most powerful man in the universe into a cautionary tale about the dangers of putting profits over passion. But here's what they couldn't kill: our memories. The way we felt when Prince Adam raised that sword. The excitement of getting a new figure for our birthday. The pure joy of playing in the world of Eternia with our friends. That's the real power of Grayskull. Not the marketing synergy or the cross-platform branding, but the genuine emotional connection between storytellers and audience. And no corporate boardroom can ever destroy that. By the power of Grayskull, we have the power. The power to remember, to appreciate, and to keep these stories alive for future generations. What do you think? Did you live through the He-Man phenomenon? Do you remember when it all came crashing down? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more deep dives into the toy and cartoon disasters of our childhood, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because trust me, He-Man wasn't the only beloved franchise that got destroyed by corporate incompetence. There are plenty more stories where this came from.